My CEO's spoiled son tried to destroy my career, but I had a plan. What happened next changed everything. I remember that morning clearly, the kind of morning you think will be just like any other, only to realize it changes everything. I was already at my desk in the Chicago office just past 7, clutching my coffee and scanning through the quarterly reports for a client that had literally kept the company afloat last year. That client was Eastwave Tech, a global software firm, and we'd worked overtime to rebuild their trust after the near collapse. Everything felt steady, almost reassuring, until the doors suddenly slammed open with a force that shook the quiet of the room. Jason stormed in, a 19-year-old kid with zero real experience, but a title that made him dangerous: Junior Operations Director. His designer suit was a size too big, hanging awkwardly on his lanky frame, but the arrogance radiating off him could have filled the entire office. His eyes burned with this childish fury, the kind only a spoiled heir can conjure when someone dares to challenge their delusions of grandeur. Before I could even process what was happening, he slammed his fist on my desk and barked, "Do you think you can just ignore me?" I stayed calm, refusing to rise to his theatrics. "Jason," I said evenly, "I don't take orders from interns." His face flushed bright red, the veins in his neck pulsing with fury. "I'm the future CEO of this company," he spat, voice dripping with entitlement. "You'll regret this." I raised a skeptical eyebrow, gesturing toward the door with the politest tone I could manage. "Then I'll deal with you when you're actually the CEO. Until then, please leave my office." I knew brushing him off so bluntly would come back to haunt me, but I didn't expect it to hit so soon or so hard. That confrontation wasn't just some passing storm. It was the beginning of a battle I never wanted but couldn't avoid. Looking back, I can see now how much the company was already crumbling beneath the surface, even before Jason arrived. His father, Robert, the CEO, announced Jason would be joining the firm about 3 months prior to that morning. Everyone assumed the kid would spend a few weeks shadowing various departments before growing bored and disappearing back to his luxury condo on the north side. We were all wrong. Jason was handed the title of Junior Operations Director like some royal heir receiving a crown, despite having no qualifications and zero understanding of how our company actually worked. His presence wasn't just a nuisance. It became a toxic influence that spread quickly. Somehow, he believed that because of that shiny title, I was supposed to follow his orders. I tried to play along at first, silently fixing his embarrassing mistakes before anyone else noticed. I covered for him when deadlines slipped and proposals were half-baked. Why? Because I believed in the company, because I wanted to protect my team, and maybe because I held on to some foolish hope that he'd grow up. I was wrong. The breaking point came 2 weeks before that morning when Jason barged into my office, throwing a file on my desk like it was a grenade. "Fire the Douglas team," he demanded flatly. They annoyed me. The Douglas team was mine. They had just secured a $4.1 million contract that was crucial to the company's survival and future growth. "I'm not firing anyone just because they annoyed you," I said, voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. His answer was pure entitlement. "I'll tell my father you refused a direct order." I met his gaze without blinking. "Go ahead." He stormed out, confident I'd crumble under the threat. But I didn't. That night at the annual spring gala, where I was representing our international clients, the division I had spent 6 years building from the ground up, I let myself believe hard work might still mean something. The venue sparkled with chandeliers and polished marble, and the investors' smiles felt genuine. Then my phone buzzed. One message from Robert Carter, the CEO. "Claire, please come to my office first thing tomorrow morning." I felt the familiar knot twist in my stomach. Sleep was elusive, every minute haunted by what awaited me. By 7:30 the next morning, I was standing in front of Robert's desk, barely able to hold myself together. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Claire," he said quietly, voice weighed down by exhaustion, "I'm afraid I have to." I cut him off, leaning in close. "Check your inbox first." His face paled instantly as he opened the folder I had sent him the night before, containing 43 emails documenting every reckless order and threat from Jason. Some were laughable, others were borderline illegal. Commands to falsify delivery reports, demands to manipulate financial figures, direct threats against me. He stared as if the screen was some kind of live grenade, his confident CEO mask slipping away. I crossed my arms. "You didn't know?" He flinched. The truth was ugly but simple. He had known, at least part of it. He'd just turned a blind eye because it was easier to protect his golden boy than face the mess head on. "Why didn't you stop this sooner?" I asked, voice even but cold. His eyes betrayed guilt and fear. I thought it would blow over. No, I said firmly. I came here because I won't let a spoiled 19-year-old ruin careers while you pretend everything's fine. For a long moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then Robert whispered, "What do you want?" I allowed myself a small, controlled smile. "I want my career back. I want the Douglas team safe. I want this nonsense stopped before it destroys the company." That day, I walked out of his office with my heart pounding fiercely, not out of anger, but with the clear knowledge that my fight was only beginning. Within days, the subtle attacks started. Meetings I should have been part of were suddenly rescheduled without me. Emails went unanswered. Budget approvals dragged for weeks. It was classic corporate sabotage, and Jason wore his smirk like a badge of honor whenever I crossed paths with him. He even winked once, as if daring me to keep fighting. What he didn't understand was that sometimes the very people he tried to crush were the ones holding the entire company together. 3 months later, Robert called me back to his office. His voice was low, tired. "You were right. Jason's out of control." I raised an eyebrow. "Good. So you've talked to him?" He looked away. "I tried. He won't listen. He said if I'm not gone, he'd take it to the board." I laughed out loud, both at the absurdity and the audacity of a 19-year-old threatening board action. Robert didn't laugh. "Claire, I have to suspend you temporarily. It's not personal." I stared him down. "It's never personal, is it?" He winced. "I'll make it right. I promise." But I knew better. He wouldn't stand up to his son. He'd sacrifice me, the person who had built his international division, because it was easier to preserve the family image. And while I nodded politely and left with my head held high, what they didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment for months. I wasn't angry or surprised anymore. I was ready. Because real power isn't about titles or family names. It's about competence, character, and refusing to back down when the stakes are highest. And that's exactly what I planned to prove. After that suspension notice landed in my inbox, everything around me seemed to shift like the ground was cracking beneath my feet. The office, once familiar and steady, became an unpredictable maze of whispered conversations and closed doors. Suddenly, meetings that used to include me were held behind my back, and emails I had been copied on now vanished from my sight. Budget approvals stalled endlessly, as if someone was deliberately draining the lifeblood from the projects I had spent years nurturing. It was clear that Jason had started to use his influence not just to disrupt, but to erase me from the company's future altogether. One afternoon, I caught him standing outside a meeting room, his usual smirk playing across his lips as he casually winked at me through the glass. The message was loud and clear. He thought he had won. But what Jason didn't realize was that his arrogance was the perfect bait for a trap I had been quietly setting for months. I wasn't going to fight him with shouting matches or childish threats. I was going to fight with evidence, cold, undeniable proof of his recklessness and misconduct. I knew I couldn't do it alone. Over the years, I had earned the trust and respect of some incredible colleagues. Marta, our head of compliance, was one of the most meticulous people I knew, and David, the senior legal counsel, had a reputation for cutting through corporate nonsense to get to the heart of any problem. I scheduled private meetings with both, far from prying ears and eyes, where I laid out everything I had gathered: emails, meeting notes, client complaints, and the patterns of reckless decisions Jason had been making without oversight. At first, their reactions were the same as mine: disbelief mixed with frustration. Marta shook her head slowly, whispering, "Claire, this could ruin your career if it backfires." David nodded grimly, adding, "If the board finds out about this, the whole leadership team could be in serious trouble." But when I looked them both in the eyes, I told them that this wasn't just about me. It was about protecting the company we all believed in. After a long pause, Marta leaned forward, her voice steady. "I'm with you." David nodded, and just like that, a quiet alliance was born. The nights that followed were long and exhausting. We cross-referenced contracts Jason had meddled with and flagged compliance violations that risked sparking formal investigations. David drafted confidential memos detailing potential breaches of fiduciary duty and outlined who might be held responsible. Marta discovered that one of Jason's special projects had almost landed us in hot water with international trade laws. If I hadn't intervened discreetly 2 months earlier, the fallout could have crushed the company's reputation and finances. Throughout this process, I kept my head down and stayed professional. I didn't leak anything prematurely or stir drama. I knew the board would have to hear the truth from their own trusted departments to take it seriously. Meanwhile, I reached out to Michelle, the head of partnerships at Eastwave Tech, our largest international client. We met for lunch at a quiet restaurant where no one would recognize us. I asked casually about their future plans, and she gave me a sharp look before confiding. Claire, if you're gone, so is Eastwave. That was the kind of confirmation I needed. The company was on the edge, and Jason's mismanagement was pushing us over the cliff. By the time my suspension was officially announced, Marta and David had already submitted a comprehensive joint report to the board, and Eastwave sent a formal letter expressing serious concerns about the current leadership. Despite the chaos swirling around me, I didn't feel triumphant. Instead, I felt ready. Jason had spent months trying to bully and threaten me, but he didn't understand one simple truth. You can't intimidate someone who has nothing left to lose and everything worth fighting for. The official suspension email went out at exactly 9:17 a.m. on a Tuesday. It was cold and sterile, with no explanation, simply stating that I was on administrative leave pending an internal review. But the real review had already begun, one that wasn't about me at all. At 10:05 a.m., Marta and David's report landed in the hands of the board of directors. The document was clinical and precise, outlining how Jason had attempted to manipulate financial data, issued unauthorized directives risking contractual violations, and interfered with compliance processes. Most damningly, it detailed how Robert, the CEO, had either ignored or enabled these actions. I wasn't in the room for the board meeting that followed, but Marta kept me updated via text. Robert looks like he's aged 10 years in an hour, she said. Jason tried to pin this all on you. The board wasn't buying it. They demanded answers. Throughout that afternoon, I read every message with a strange calm, knowing I hadn't leaked anything myself. The truth was surfacing on its own, and there was no stopping it. Around 2 p.m., Robert called me. I let the first call go to voicemail. He tried again. By the third ring, I picked up, my voice steady but cool. Claire, we need to talk. We met later that day in his office. For once, Jason wasn't lurking in the background, and Robert looked hollow, stripped of his usual CEO confidence. The board wants to meet with you tomorrow, he said quietly. Then he hesitated, almost afraid to say what came next. They've asked for Jason's immediate resignation and for me to step down temporarily pending review. I didn't flinch. Sounds appropriate. Robert gave me a bitter smile. You really did it. You destroyed him. I met his gaze steadily. I didn't destroy anyone. Jason did that all by himself. I just refused to cover it up. He slumped forward, defeated. You were the best we had. I should have backed you. I said nothing because there was nothing left to say. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom for the first time in years. 12 directors stared at me with cold, serious eyes, but instead of grilling me, they asked for my perspective. I spoke calmly, presenting facts and explaining the risks Jason's recklessness had created. I talked about the deals I'd negotiated, the partnerships I'd protected, and the stability I intended to restore. Heads nodded around the table, and by the end of the meeting, the chairman leaned forward and said, Claire, we want you to consider stepping into an interim leadership role while we restructure. I could hardly believe it. I wasn't just reinstated, I was promoted. But even as I shook hands and smiled politely, a small part of me remained guarded. Titles can change overnight, and power can be fleeting. Respect, however, is earned, and it's the one thing Jason would never regain. 2 weeks later, Jason was gone. No farewell email, no announcement, just quietly shipped off to manage family investments overseas. Robert stepped down as well, citing personal reasons, while the company thanked him for his dedicated service. The family had quietly lost their grip. I passed Jason's old office on my first official day as interim director, noting the empty desk and the discarded nameplate. I didn't gloat or celebrate. This wasn't about proving a point. It was about protecting the people who had risked everything under his shadow. I gathered my team for a meeting, keeping it simple and honest. I don't care about titles or last names, I told them. I care about work, integrity, and respect. That's how we move forward. For the first time in weeks, I saw relief on their faces, and that was worth more than any promotion could ever be. The day I stepped into the boardroom as interim director, I felt the weight of every expectation and every mistake that had come before me. 12 directors sat around the long table, their eyes sharp and their expressions guarded. But unlike before, they weren't there to accuse me. Instead, they asked questions, probing carefully for my perspective on the chaos Jason had left behind and how I planned to fix it. I spoke clearly and calmly, detailing the deals I had secured, the partnerships I'd protected, and the countless risks Jason's reckless decisions had created. It felt strange, but somehow liberating, to be listened to rather than dismissed. During that meeting, I realized how deeply divided the board had become. Some members clearly resented the influence of the Carter family, while others feared the repercussions of rocking the boat too hard. The chairman, a seasoned executive with decades of experience, leaned forward near the end and said, "Claire, we'd like you to take on interim leadership of the international division while we assess the situation." It was more than I expected, and though the promotion came with no guarantees, it felt like a vote of confidence I desperately needed. Walking out of the boardroom, I understood that my battle was far from over. Rebuilding trust with our clients and stabilizing the company's fractured culture would be the true test. Titles could be stripped away, but respect and loyalty had to be earned every day, especially after months of turmoil. I knew Jason's shadow lingered. His influence hadn't vanished overnight, and some people still questioned whether I could hold the reins firmly. Over the next few weeks, I focused on transparency and communication, reaching out to every team member to reassure them that their work mattered and that their voices would be heard. I refused to tolerate the nepotism and entitlement that had eroded morale before, setting clear expectations for accountability. It was a balancing act, trying to restore confidence while navigating the subtle resistance from those who had benefited from the old ways. But my team slowly started to rally, and I could see their relief when they realized I wasn't here just to play politics. One of the most rewarding moments came when Michelle, the head of partnerships at Eastwave Tech, called me personally to confirm they were renewing their multi-million-dollar contract. "We want to work with leaders who understand their business," she said simply. Hearing those words felt like a personal victory, not just for me, but for everyone who had stood by the company during the chaos. Other clients followed suit, and soon deals started closing again, bringing stability back to the company's bottom line. Meanwhile, the news about Jason's departure trickled through the office grapevine. No official farewell, no grand announcement, just whispers that he had been quietly relocated to manage family investments abroad. It was the kind of exile designed to avoid scandal, and honestly, it was exactly what the company needed. Robert's resignation came next, framed as a voluntary step back to focus on personal matters. But everyone knew it was part of the fallout from months of mismanagement. The company's internal memo praised his commitment to transition efforts, but behind the polished language, the leadership had fundamentally shifted. On my first official day as interim vice president of international operations, I walked past Jason's old corner office. The desk was empty, save for a nameplate lying face down. I didn't feel victorious. Instead, I felt a deep sense of responsibility. This wasn't about proving a point or rubbing salt in wounds. It was about protecting the hardworking people who had endured years of chaos and rebuilding the company's reputation on a foundation of respect and integrity. I called my team together for a meeting without fanfare or speeches. Looking around the room, I said simply, "I don't care about titles or family names. What matters is our work, our integrity, and the respect we show each other. That's how we will move forward, together." For the first time in weeks, I saw a genuine relief and hope on their faces, and it reminded me why I had fought so hard. But even as things began to stabilize, I knew the true test was still ahead. The scars left by Jason's reckless behavior wouldn't heal overnight, and the company's culture needed constant care to prevent the same mistakes from recurring. I dedicated myself to transparent leadership, fostering open dialogue, and setting a standard that no one, regardless of their background, would be above the rules. Months passed, and the company started thriving again. Contracts were renewed, new partnerships formed, and morale improved noticeably. I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could turn the page and build something stronger than what had come before. Yet, despite all the progress, a part of me remained watchful, knowing that power struggles in the boardroom rarely ended so cleanly. One evening, I was invited to a private dinner with the board's chairman and a few senior executives. Sitting across from people who once saw me as just another department head, I sensed a change in the room's atmosphere. They weren't looking at me as a placeholder anymore. They were considering me as a leader. The chairman spoke first, offering me the permanent role of Vice President of International Operations, effective immediately. I paused, letting the weight of that moment sink in before I replied quietly, "I have conditions." The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I laid out my terms clearly. Zero tolerance for nepotism in leadership positions, transparent accountability standards for all executives, and full authority to build and protect my team my way. The chairman nodded after each point, finally saying, "Agreed." Signing that contract wasn't about the title or the raise. It was about securing a future where no one else would have to fight the battles I had faced just to be treated with basic dignity. As I looked out at the city skyline that night, I felt a surge of hope mixed with the knowledge that leadership was a heavy burden, but one I was ready to carry. Yet, even with this victory, something in the back of my mind whispered that the story wasn't over. Power has a way of hiding secrets, and the real challenge would be keeping the company safe from the shadows still lurking in the corners of the boardroom. But for now, I allowed myself to breathe, knowing I had earned this moment and was ready for whatever came next. Taking on the role of Vice President of International Operations came with a weight I hadn't fully anticipated until I sat alone in my new office late one evening. The silence was thick, and the city lights outside felt distant, like the world I was fighting to change existed somewhere far away. I knew that earning a title was only the beginning. Keeping the company on a steady path would require relentless effort and unwavering integrity. My first weeks were consumed by rebuilding fractured relationships and restoring confidence among our clients and internal teams alike. One of the most crucial steps was reaching out personally to Michelle at Eastwave Tech, whose contract renewal had been a turning point in our recovery. During our meeting, she was frank yet hopeful, telling me that leadership mattered more than anything else. "Claire," she said, "we want to work with people who understand responsibility, not entitlement." Her words stayed with me as I went about repairing other partnerships that had been shaken by months of chaos and mistrust. Slowly but surely, deals began to close again, signaling a fragile but genuine return to stability. Within the company, I focused heavily on culture and communication, recognizing that the damage left by Jason's arrogance ran deeper than financial missteps. I introduced transparent policies that made it clear no one was above the rules, no matter their background or family ties. I insisted on accountability at every level, and while some resisted, most began to embrace the clarity and fairness I demanded. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the resistance felt like a wall too high to climb. But my team's gradual shift toward trust and collaboration proved that change was possible. Jason's absence was a ghost in the halls. His corner office remained empty, a quiet reminder of the turmoil he had caused. Rumors spread that he had been quietly relocated overseas to manage family investments, a fate designed to avoid public scandal. Meanwhile, Robert's resignation was framed as a personal choice, but everyone knew the truth. The family's grip on the company had finally loosened. The internal memo praised his dedication to transition efforts, but beneath the polished language lay a clear message that the era of unchallenged family influence was over. One afternoon, as I walked past Jason's empty office, I noticed the nameplate lying face down on the desk. I felt no satisfaction, only a renewed sense of responsibility. This wasn't about personal victories. It was about protecting the countless employees who had suffered under the chaos. I called a team meeting without pomp or ceremony and told them plainly, "Titles don't matter here. What counts is the work we do, the respect we show one another, and the integrity we uphold. Together, that's how we move forward." Seeing their relieved expressions reminded me why I had fought so hard. Despite the progress, I was always aware of the fragile nature of our success. Trust, once broken, takes time and consistent effort to rebuild. I dedicated myself to maintaining open dialogue with every department, making it clear that transparency and respect were non-negotiable. The wounds left by Jason's reckless behavior weren't going to heal overnight, and I knew the company's culture needed constant attention to prevent similar problems in the future. I worked to create an environment where merit and character were valued above all else, pushing back against any remnants of entitlement. Months passed, and with each one, the company grew stronger. Contracts were renewed, new clients signed on, and employee morale improved noticeably. The weight that had once pressed heavily on my shoulders began to lift, replaced by a cautious optimism. I allowed myself to hope that the worst was behind us, though I never let my guard down completely. Corporate leadership is rarely a straight path, and I knew the next challenges were only a matter of time. Then, one evening, I received an invitation to a private dinner with the board's chairman and a few senior executives. The setting was intimate, the kind of meeting where unspoken agendas linger in the air. Sitting across from people who had once viewed me as just another department head, I could sense a shift in the way they regarded me. This was no longer about temporary fixes or emergency measures. They were considering me a true leader. The chairman spoke first, offering me the permanent role of Vice President of International Operations, effective immediately. I took a moment to absorb the significance of that offer before responding quietly. I have conditions. The room fell silent, all eyes on me as I laid out my terms. Zero tolerance for nepotism in leadership roles, transparent accountability standards for all executives, and full authority to build and protect my team according to my vision. The chairman nodded after each point, finally saying, "Agreed." Signing that contract wasn't about the title or the pay raise. It was about ensuring no one else would have to fight the same battles I had just to be treated with basic dignity. That night, as I looked out over the city skyline, I felt a strange mix of hope and resolve. Leadership was a burden heavy with responsibility, but I was ready to carry it. Yet, even in that moment of triumph, a quiet voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. Power has a way of hiding secrets, and the shadows of the past rarely disappear entirely. The real challenge wasn't over, it was only beginning. But for now, I allowed myself to breathe, knowing that I had earned this moment and was prepared for whatever came next. Just when I thought the worst was behind me, the subtle cracks beneath the surface began to widen, revealing something far more complicated and unsettling. I had worked tirelessly to rebuild trust and stability within the company, yet power has a way of playing tricks on those who think they've won. One evening, not long after my official promotion, I was invited to a private dinner with the board chairman and a few senior executives, an event meant to celebrate progress, but one that quickly revealed hidden layers of the battle I had yet to fight. Sitting across the polished mahogany table, the atmosphere was tense but polite, filled with polite smiles and measured words. As the dinner progressed, I noticed a strange dynamic unfolding. Certain board members exchanged knowing glances and spoke in guarded tones. The chairman leaned in closer and lowered his voice, telling me quietly that while Jason's departure had seemed like the end of the family's influence, there were still powerful forces working behind the scenes, determined to keep control. He hinted at a board member fiercely loyal to the Carters, someone who had quietly undermined many of my early initiatives. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I thought I had cleared the boardroom of shadows, but instead, I had stepped into a minefield where loyalty and legacy still held sway over decisions. I felt the weight of invisible hands pressing down, resisting change, and protecting a status quo that I had fought so hard to dismantle. That night, the celebration felt hollow because I understood that the real war for the company's soul was far from over. In the days that followed, I sensed the quiet sabotage increasing, subtle shifts in meeting agendas, new rules that made decision-making slower and more convoluted, and whispers that questioned my leadership in veiled conversations. Some executives seemed eager to test my resolve, pushing boundaries to see how much I would tolerate. I refused to be shaken. Every time a challenge surfaced, I met it head-on, drawing strength from the team I had built and the clear vision I held for the company's future. The most unsettling part was the knowledge that this powerful faction in the boardroom was skilled at working in shadows, influencing decisions without leaving obvious traces. It was a game of patience and power, and I was learning that leadership required not only competence, but also political savvy and unwavering courage. I began digging deeper, quietly gathering information, just as I had done when fighting Jason's reckless rule. This time, the stakes were higher and the players more experienced. One afternoon, a trusted ally from the legal department approached me with a confidential report outlining suspicious voting patterns and unexplained delays in key projects. It confirmed my suspicions that certain board members were working to stall progress and maintain their hidden influence. The revelation was a reminder that the company's future wasn't secured by titles alone. It depended on constant vigilance and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. I realized that my fight wasn't just about replacing a spoiled heir, but about dismantling a deeply entrenched system of privilege. Despite the growing tension, I refused to let fear dictate my actions. Instead, I doubled down on transparency and accountability, making sure every decision was documented and every process open to scrutiny. I kept the communication lines wide open with my team, sharing what I could without jeopardizing sensitive information. Their trust became my strongest armor against the invisible attacks from within. Together, we weathered the storm of backroom politics, refusing to let old power structures dictate our company's destiny. Then came the moment that changed everything. A secret meeting I wasn't invited to but found out about through a slip of the tongue during a conversation with a longtime board member. They planned to introduce a new leadership candidate, someone with ties to the Carter family, as a way to regain control without openly challenging me. It was a carefully orchestrated move to undermine my authority and re-establish the old order behind closed doors. Hearing this, I knew the battle had shifted from open conflict to a quiet war for the company's soul. Instead of panicking, I chose to confront the situation directly. I requested an emergency board meeting, demanding transparency and a full discussion of any proposed leadership changes. My approach was firm but professional, emphasizing that the company's future depended on merit, integrity, and respect, not legacy or favoritism. The room was charged with tension, but I held my ground, presenting evidence and rallying support from board members who valued the new direction. It was a turning point, a test of whether the company would truly embrace change or fall back into old patterns. In the end, the board voted in my favor, rejecting the covert attempt to install another Carter loyalist. The victory was hard-won, but it sent a clear message. The company was ready to move forward under accountable, transparent leadership. However, I knew better than to think this was the final chapter. Power doesn't disappear overnight. It morphs and reemerges in unexpected ways. As I left the boardroom that day, the weight of what lay ahead settled heavily on my shoulders. I wasn't just fighting for a title or a division. I was fighting for the soul of a company that had nearly been lost to entitlement and silence. But despite the challenges, I felt a quiet confidence. I had survived storms far worse and learned that true leadership means standing firm even when the future is uncertain. Looking back now, I realize that the greatest victories aren't the ones celebrated with fanfare. They're the quiet battles fought behind closed doors, where integrity and courage are tested every day. The story isn't over, and the road ahead remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: I'm not backing down. No matter what shadows rise, I will keep fighting to protect the people who believe in the work we do and the future we deserve.